My guest today is Brian Cory Dobbs. He is a documentary filmmaker and one of the prominent voices at the forefront of Mars disclosure. His documentary, Blue Planet Red, includes interviews with many scientists and experts, including Robert Schoch and Avi Loeb, about the various aspects of Mars, such as the geology, the history, and even the possibility of ancient civilizations. His work also continues on his YouTube channel, where you'll find many follow-up interviews and much more information. Brian, thanks for joining me.
Hey, thanks a lot, William. I'm really happy to be here.
Well, I'm excited to get into some of this stuff because this is one of my favorite subjects, and you're definitely one of the people at the forefront of it right now. Now, your film Blue Planet Red, which I saw some time ago, was excellent. And but I'd like you to recap maybe, or give an idea of what it's about and what your work's about really in general, to just people who aren't familiar with it.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot, man. I guess on the surface you could say it's a documentary about Mars, but more specifically, what I'm really trying to lean into now is this term Mars disclosure, because most people, I believe, don't really know what the story is about Mars. They kind of know the superficial stuff. It's the red planet. There's a bunch of rocks there, and NASA's been searching for life. And oh, by the way, there's this face on Mars.
Yeah.
And that's about it. And that's really where the story starts and ends with people. But as it turns out, NASA has done a lot of research on the planet over the past 50 years. And what's tragic is that a lot of that research just really is not well known to the public. And it's really because NASA doesn't really like to talk about what they found there. So that really leaves an opportunity for people like me. I'm a documentary filmmaker, to come in and put the whole story together, because there's been plenty of published research over the past 50 years telling quite a compelling story, and I really felt like I could help get that story across to the public in a way that they haven't seen before by making a documentary about it.
Well, you did an excellent job, I'll tell you that. And I think I've been watching a lot of your stuff recently, and it's really fascinating, and it's really kind of disturbing the way that there have been a lot of NASA, like with the face on Mars, for instance, that you talked about. That's one that I remember, from a long time ago, seeing the pictures of it and stuff. And then when they had the orbiters and the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter and all that they were promising these better pictures. Okay, yeah, they acted like it was something that was really on the back burner, that they didn't really care about. Oh yeah, but then when they finally showed this photo that they released a few years back, I can't remember what year it was, but I remember seeing it, and it was it did look, well, I think somebody said it looked like a cat litter box or something, but you had found out that it was that it had actually been gone through all these Photoshop filters, and all this stuff had been done to it. The picture had been doctored so much. It seems like they do that with a lot of things, and I mean, it's hard to continue to tell the public that you're being honest and upfront about the information that you're giving them when you're doing things like that in order to be deceptive.
Yes, and while I don't like to beat up on NASA too much in this regard, I do have to be fair here in my criticism, because there are two main things that NASA has done over the past 50 years that have been questionable at the very least. And what you just mentioned was one of them, where we've been getting these different pictures of the face on Mars. I mean, the face on Mars, rightly or wrongly, gets a lot of attention because it's just such an anomaly, and we're still debating whether or not it's supposed to be a face or if it's just a a hill or a mountain or something over there. And NASA doesn't do themselves any service when, like you said, they'll take additional photographs decades after the original photographs at a purposefully distorted angle, not top down, just kind of off to the side. And then when they run it through the processing software and release it to the public, it looks nothing like a face anymore. It doesn't look like anything similar to the original Viking photos. So it calls into question, why are they doing that? As I understand it, the story is that that face that kind of came out 25 years ago, that face photo, was so bad that NASA Administrator Dan Golden ordered them to go back and retake photos, which is then why we got better photos of it top down that showed what it was really supposed to look like. You know, as it relates to purposely distorting the face, like in a Photoshop program, you know, I suppose that's possible. I don't know of any direct stories there, but given their history there of not being quite honest with the face, I certainly would entertain that possibility. And I guess one more thing to add about their dishonesty about the face, it all started immediately back in 1976, 77, when Tobias Owen, who worked for NASA, he's the one who actually discovered the face. They had to print out photos and use magnifying glasses because they're looking at actual film, or you know, photographs, like literal photographs printed out or something. So he discovered the face. He's like, oh my God, it looks like a face. And NASA had this press conference and they said, hey, we're going to show you something that looks like a face. But, you know, when we went back hours later and rephotographed the area, that little feature no longer looked like a face. Okay, because the lighting was different, blah, blah, blah. The problem is they never actually did that. So this was actually a direct lie, and I hate using that word, but that's what it was. They didn't go back hours later and rephotograph the face. You know, the
that
way
was
the
in 1976.
Yes, yeah. So the way the satellite was orbiting, it wouldn't have allowed them to do that anyway. So you have to question, why are they telling us they went back and rephotographed the face and basically telling us there's nothing to see here when that's not what happened? My guess is, look, NASA is run by people, and people, you know, when we're staring at something literally right in the face that is so foreign to us and perhaps haunting in a way, and we're unsure of what to make of it, most people just want to stay in their little safe space and not cause any alarm, especially if you're an agency that has the ability to disrupt society in some really impactful way. So, you know, the record shows that actually they did rephotograph the face, but it was essentially months or even years later and under different lighting conditions, and the facial features still held up. So why are they being really dodgy about the face? You know, it certainly doesn't look good. The other thing that NASA has done, you might have heard about this too, William, is that they have artificially tinted their photographs more red, so making Mars appear more red than it actually is. So these, and they've since stopped doing that, but these two things really have called into question NASA's integrity on communicating about the planet Mars and, you know, any anomalies found there.
Yeah, they do that a lot with, I think, just about every photograph that they take in outer space. Like I know they do that with the Hubble Space Telescope, and they've done it with a lot of different orbiters, and like the Juno, where they'll do false color. Like they're just trying to present it, and I think they're trying to like take artistic license and present it in a way that, you know, they think is going to be more palatable to people, or they'll think it will get people more excited about it. But you know, I think most people would rather just, you know, you can do that later, but just show us the, you know, what it actually looks like. And that's kind of like, really, with the face on Mars, it seems like, and with that whole region, the Cydonia region of Mars, it seems like they, you know, because of that, and because of many years of people asking questions and looking at photographs themselves, and the NASA, from the NASA websites and stuff, people wanted them to revisit that region for a long time, and they just wouldn't do it. They just like seemed to avoid it. They had like, oh, we've got like a dozen things ahead of that in line, and it just seems to me like, I mean, this is a public agency funded by the public, that if the public wants to see that, why not? What is the harm in flying over it and taking some good photographs of it?
Yeah, I know, and it seems to make sense for us who are open-minded individuals, who grew up watching Star Trek and wondering about what else is out there in outer space. Uh, NASA has this reputation. I think they want to maintain, and introducing anything outside of the safe margins, so to speak, they're not comfortable with that, because when it comes down to exactly what humanity's place is in the cosmos, we do think we're special here on Earth, and Mars indicates that there's some history in our solar system that is older than the history that we have here on Earth, because we are seeing more than just the face. We're seeing a lot of other what appear to be structures and artifacts just across the surface of the planet. And if that's true, if these things are in fact structures and artifacts, then that means someone was there much earlier on that planet than humanity's existence here on Earth. And then the question then becomes, if that's true, then what happened to them?
Yeah, I don't want to. I don't want to come off like I'm trying to trash NASA too much either. I know they do amazing work, and it's just it's because we love them that we're so critical, But
Right.
But let's get into some of those things that you're talking about, like the geological anomalies and the artifacts, or the things that appear to be artifacts, and that you've discovered, and that the ones that you find the most compelling.
Well, I guess if the face on Mars is in this place, this region called Cydonia, and it, to me, exactly where these things are found is of lesser importance, but Cydonia gets all of the attention because that was essentially first where we started seeing these odd structures. 12 miles away from the face is this, what appears to be, strangely, a 5-sided pyramidal structure. And I go back and forth. Sometimes I'll say it's a pyramidal structure. Sometimes I'll just say it's a pyramid, because when I'm looking at these things, I have yet to find a reasonable geological explanation for some of these structures. Carl Sagan has this really famous quote: "Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence." And a lot of people like to use that in response to whenever someone on the internet makes a bold claim about interesting discoveries. In disbelief, they'll just throw that quote out there, and that's supposed to take care of it. That's supposed to shut the conversation down. But I would respond to that quote with another quote from Carl Sagan, where he says, when he was describing in his TV series Cosmos and his book Cosmos from 1980, trying to demonstrate if there was an intelligent alien species looking down upon Earth from their spaceship, how would they first identify intelligent life exists here on Earth without directly landing on the planet, walking around and meeting people? How would they first identify it? And he says, intelligent life first reveals itself through the geometric regularity of its constructions. Now, what does this mean? It means if you're looking down from space, like we can see the Great Wall of China. It's a long line. We can obviously see that's not a natural landform. Then if we get just a little bit closer, we can start to see grid patterns, cities, buildings, and things of that nature. So, and even looking at the pyramids themselves, you can, you don't have to go down all the way to see that there are these large geometric structures. with geometric regularity, meaning it's just not an abstract, it's not a fractally based shape like you find in nature. It is symmetrical, it has repeated expressions of geometry. So when we look at the surface of Mars with certain surface features, we are seeing them demonstrating not only symmetry, but geometric regularity. So we are seeing the things that Dr. Carl Sagan did propose as ways of identifying intelligent life on Mars. So now a five-sided pyramid, certainly that sounds odd, but if you split it right down the middle, you have repeated expressions of 30, 60, and 90-degree angles. Now, it doesn't look pristine, and I'm okay with that, because we have to remember the surface of Mars is very old. It's millions, if not billions, of years old. I mean, NASA says, and I'll take their word for it, because I don't have any data indicating otherwise, that NASA lost its atmosphere and all of its water about 3.5 billion years ago. So if that's the case, let's just say if there were life on there and then it vanished, well, if the surface of Mars is a few billion years old, certainly, even though the erosional forces are much weaker on that planet, things still would degrade over time. But even in spite of all that, we do have clear signs of geometric regularity, and that's just within Cydonia. And if we look elsewhere across the whole planet, which we've had the great fortune of doing, thanks to NASA for taking all these photos over the past 50 years with higher resolution cameras, we now see, I'll just go ahead and say it, pyramids, four-sided, three-sided, scattered all over the planet. And I don't know how you can look at these things and not at least entertain that idea. If your only response, let's just say academia, if their only response is, well, that can't possibly be true, you can't possibly have pyramids on Mars because it's on Mars. If that's their response, well, that's not a very scientific response. As much as it's hard to believe that there could have been an ancient civilization on Mars, I'm just looking at things with my own two eyes, and my own two eyes say that's not a volcano. That's not a mountain range. It looks like a giant pyramid. There's no other way else to say it.
Yeah, what is their explanation? Have they addressed all of these at all, or is there? Because I've seen some of them, and I just don't see I mean, to me they look like a structure that is, it's very geometrical. It doesn't look like, and one of them kind of looked like, there's a pyramid in Egypt that, like, where one side of it kind of collapsed, and there's one of them that I remember seeing like that kind of looked like that, like where one side of it had kind of collapsed, So what do they,
right.
do they have any explanation like of what geological like forces, or, what would cause all these things?
Rarely do they have an explanation.
Usually just don't address it, or
yeah, they usually just kind of keep their mouth shut. One of the more notable pyramidal structures on Mars is interestingly directly adjacent to an impact crater. But so there's a whole lot to unpack here, and this it's referred to as crater pyramid. The impact crater itself is 2.5 miles wide. Now you got to think, if anything were standing on the surface and a meteor came down and created a crater 2.5 miles wide, anything next to it would have been blown to smithereens by the shock wave, or at least covered by the exploding ejecta material. Now what we see next to it is a four-sided pyramid that has no ejected material on top of it and has no damage to it. Now, NASA, interestingly, has titled this formation as what they call a knob, K-N-O-B. and I had to look this up. I'm like, if you actually go to their website right now, that's what they call it, knob. Now, what is a knob? Knob is actually a more common name for something called a came, K-A-M-E. See, already it's really confusing. Now, what the heck is a came? Essentially boils down to this: a glacier deposit. When glaciers move along the land, they pick up loose rocks and debris, and then when they finally melt much later, all that debris just sort of comes together and just forms this mound of loose dirt. And then maybe some, grass starts growing over it, and then you just have this little hill many years later once the glacier's gone. So the problem is with this explanation is that it's ridiculous, because number one, this glacial deposit is 1.7 miles wide, and there are no other glacial deposits anywhere. It doesn't look like a loosely put together with debris and dirt and rocks.
How would a a bunch of rocks that have just been carried by a glacier end up being put together in a very precise and geometrical way? I don't understand that.
You can clearly see, based on the lighting conditions, it has 4 straight sides to it. It's right next to a crater. It doesn't have any damage to it. There's nothing else like it in the area. It's 1.7 miles wide. The explanation that this is just simply a glacial deposit doesn't make any logical sense. What does make sense is that, well, and I guess the only other question then becomes, is this a volcano that just happened to spring up right after the impact created this crater? Well, volcanoes don't have 4 equal flat sides to them. They're usually round and conical in nature and a little bit rugged, and this has flat, equal sides to it. And on top of that, it's much too small to be a volcano. Now, on Mars, I actually ran the calculations. The average size, William, take a guess. What do you think the average size of a volcano is on Mars? I did the average calculations. What do you think the average size might be?
Well, just knowing that that Mars has the biggest volcano in the solar system, then I would think that they would be pretty big.
They are.
No idea, miles.
Yes. In fact, the average size of volcanoes on Mars is 100 miles wide. So when you have something that's only 1.7 miles wide, it's simply much too small to be a volcano. It doesn't look like one, and it's just completely outside, of what the average is. So if you get past what the natural geological explanations could be, you have to consider the alternative, that this thing was constructed after the impact, and that the reason why it's directly adjacent to a crater, I have an idea about this, and it's not something I came up with. It's based off of, I don't know if you've heard of Jeffrey Drum and the Land of Chem channel. He's over in Egypt, living there right now, uncovering exactly what the true functionality of the pyramids were. And what it boils down to is that they were a bunch of chemical factories, and that the Great Pyramid was something that was designed to attract lightning. And it was the utilization of the electricity gathered from lightning that powered these chemical factories, and that these pyramids themselves were located near the Nile River because they needed water to help pump these chemicals through the pyramids and actually do what it was designed to do. So water played an important role in the functionality of the pyramid.
Does that have to do with the structures that they found underneath the pyramids recently, like the?
Good question. The pyramids are such a mystery, but if for anybody out there listening right now, if you want to get a better idea about what it is I'm talking about, just go listen to Jeffrey Drum and the Land of Chem. That's his channel. CHEM, chemistry, land of chem. But this got me thinking, what would that crater on Mars have been filled with many, many years ago?
It's true, yeah.
It would have been filled with water. And if this pyramid needed water to function, like the Great Pyramid and other pyramids here on Earth, their proximity to water, that starts to make a little bit more sense to me. And oh, by the way, it's not the only one like that on Mars. The people I know in the Mars community, we've discovered 3, if not 4 of them at this point, and they just defy logical geological explanation. So it doesn't seem unreasonable to entertain these ideas that these things were actually constructed artificially.
And of course, also, if you're, if I'm just going off on my, imagination, I could imagine that if I were a civilization at that time, and a place like that, like a crater, oftentimes those things and meteorites themselves are, sort of sacred things to people, because they came from the sky. And then if it was within anyone's memory when it did come from the sky, and it, or at least in some sort of ancient memory, then it caused all this, catastrophe and everything. And this becomes some sort of thing where maybe it becomes a site that you would want to build something like that next to.
Yeah, it's possible. We sort of just have to piece together a story here based on this interesting data, interesting evidence. And I can't say with 100% certainty that what it is we're looking at is proof. I don't really like using that word proof, but I will when it's appropriate. For example, we have proved there is water on Mars. And a lot of people don't even know that much. A lot of it is in the form of ice, but that's just a temperature difference, okay, whether or not it's solid or liquid. And why is this important? Well, NASA, their essentially mantra is let's follow the water. Why? Because that's most likely where life is going to be located. And if we're just talking about microbes can live directly in ice. So when we have a planet that has got a lot of ice on it, there's the logical next step is let's explore that planet with a fine-tooth comb, because that's the best chance we're going to have to find direct proof, observational proof of microbial life on Mars. Now, interestingly enough, 50 years ago, NASA tried to do this. And some would argue that they succeeded. And even more, or rather, even a small subset of that population of people who say that we successfully tested things there would argue that we have produced positive biological life test results on the surface of Mars. NASA's Viking mission was quite an ambitious mission, and went there and made a ton of observations and collected a lot of information. It had orbiters, it had landers, and they had 3 biological life tests, and essentially the results came back positive that there was life there. Now you might think, well, why didn't they just pop the champagne and start celebrating? The unfortunate tragedy here is that a different test that was looking for organic material in the soil did not come up with a positive result. So therefore, NASA was left with this question: how do you have life in the soil of Mars without having any organic matter? And what is organic matter? It's like when a leaf falls from the tree and it decomposes, the compostable material, the organic material in the soil that actually plants thrive off of. That's what they extract their minerals from to then grow out of. Well, if there's none of that in the soil, then it can't give any support to life. And what they call soil with no organic matter in it is regolith. So a lot of people in institutions and at NASA will refer to the Mars soil as regolith, but they're wrong. And actually, we have proven this. NASA themselves have proven this, because while the Viking lander did not find the organic material, decades later, the Curiosity rover did. So we have now proven that there is organic matter in the soil, and thus this would support the positive life test results of 1976. Now, unfortunately, NASA has not gone back and revisited their original conclusion that the life test results were ambiguous. They just sort of left it alone and have not really gone back and talked about it again, which is kind of unfortunate, because here we have scientists who have arguably discovered life on Mars, but NASA isn't giving them credit for doing so. And fast forward to today, we have the Chinese looking to get in the game, and that's what their next mission is. They want to do soil sample returns and go and study the Mars soil, and we can't let them take credit for discovering life on Mars, because arguably the United States has already done that. So there's a 50-year injustice that we really have to correct here.
Yeah, well, I remember in the 90s that there was the Allen Hills meteorite that was found on Earth. You know, it was one of the meteors from Mars that had been ejected in some way and found on Earth, just like we have moon meteors and things like that end up on Earth. And that one, there was a lot of stories in the press about it, and they had zoomed in and found this what appeared to be microbial life, and then so that made the news a lot. And then they started doing some tests on it, and then the initial tests looked like it wasn't life or something. So then that story became even bigger, like, oh, it's been debunked. But then later on, they did more tests that seemed to suggest that it was some sort of microbial life. But by then, the news media had kind of lost interest or whatever, so you didn't get that that third story. And that's another one that another time when we could have found it, maybe. Of course, it's not as exciting as finding it directly on Mars, but
it still was something that most of the world heard of, because Bill Clinton did a press conference on the White House lawn about it. I mean, how often do you get a president talking about scientific research? So yes, you're right. They actually, there's this famous photograph of what appears to be this little worm-like critter embedded within the rock that they point to as being this little bacteria. The main critique against it was that the supposed bacteria was much too small to be a bacteria. This is something that they have to use a scanning electron microscope to actually see. However, there is research to suggest that there are bacteria that can be that small. So it did go back and forth in the press. It ultimately left the public confused. And this, again, was another one of these public relations follies that NASA just wants to try to avoid. So they had the 76 Viking life test results that kind of had this maybe it is, maybe it isn't conclusion. Same thing then 20 years later with this meteorite, and whether or not it had ancient fossilized microbial life in it. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. And so at the end of the day, the public is left kind of confused about all this and not sure what to make of it. So, if I were NASA, I wouldn't really want to put my information out there only to be critiqued so hard, because they've done this twice now and it's been really highly visible, highly public for them, and it just really hasn't gone the way they want. So I think just to stay safe, they don't really want to come across as being a failure, so they don't really address any of these other anomalies, which are, in my opinion, arguably much more much more obvious. And most people understand this meteorite that you speak of, the Allen Hills meteorite that was found in Antarctica in 1984, and then took them 10 years to look at it because, they just didn't know that there could be a possibility of life in it. But then they finally got around to taking a closer look at it, and then 10 years later, it ends up in the White House lawn with Bill Clinton talking about it. Most people don't know that there are other examples of microfossils in meteorites, and we have photographs that are arguably, even to the untrained eye, much more obvious that there are, in fact, microbial organisms, or the fossilized remains of microbial organisms embedded within dozens of other meteorites. Now, why hasn't the public heard about any of that stuff? That's part of the reason why I made the documentary, is to show this kind of stuff. And these other fossilized remains were discovered and published by, drumroll, a NASA astrobiologist. So when we have NASA themselves discovering these things and not bringing it to the public's attention, one has to question why. So if they're not going to do it, then it leaves it to us, the public, to get into the game and communicate on this.
I mean, as interesting as it would be to find microbial life on Mars, or in meteorites that came from Mars, you could really just bypass every bit of that if you have structures on Mars. So, you obviously there would be microbial life, if you had that. So, what I was wondering is if, in all these years and all these probes and all these rovers and things that they've put on Mars, have they visited any of these places? Have they visited at least close to, or are they thousands of miles from there? Have they become close to any of these structures, any of these pyramid shapes, or any of these other? Because I've seen some that look like walls, or it looked like maybe a square city wall type of thing. Have they been near any of this at all? Because the only thing I've ever seen, as far as from the Mars rovers, has been just pretty much barren, desolate hills. But as much as people want to see those things, why not, why not go closer to them?
Yeah, I hear this question a lot, and I unfortunately have to deliver the bad news, is that NASA has purposefully avoided these locations where we do find these what appear to be artificially made structures, and most of the time they are miles large. So one would, think, well, if that looks like a pyramid from a satellite photo, why not land a rover there and get an up close look at it? Why not drive a rover right on top of it, see what we find? NASA, the story NASA will tell us is that, well, we have to avoid those locations because they're too hazardous for the rover. We think the rover or the lander is just going to get stuck, so we have to land in a safe zone. Now, to give them credit, I wouldn't want to spend billions of dollars on a program and many years of many employees' lives to design something and send it to Mars only to have it fail, because that has happened a couple of times, and that's no good. So in terms of getting it there, you got to give NASA credit. They've got a decent track record, a good track record of launching things into space and having them execute on the mission and succeed at their mission. But you got to think, just one time, just once, man. Let's put it in one of these more interesting spots to get an up close look at what appear to be these structures. And they just have a reluctance of doing that because it entertains this, crazy idea that there could be ancient structures there.
Well, I was thinking their excuse may have been for not visiting these sites may have been, like you had said, where they follow the water, and maybe they would say, oh, well, there's no water there. But then when we're talking about that one just a few minutes ago with the pyramid at the crater there, and they said that was a glacial deposit, so there would obviously be water there, and possibly the the crater could have been filled with water at some point. So that it seems like that would be like a a win for everybody there, because then you get to see that up close, and then they get to look for water, and uh, I understand that, like, wanting to be safe about it, but surely there's somewhere that is because I've seen the rovers move, and they can get over some pretty big obstacles, and so it's not like asking them to, as long as you're not asking them to like land in a debris field with boulders that are 6 feet high or something like that, everywhere, then it looks like you could get close to something and get a good look at it at least.
Yeah. And I think it's not a matter of can we do it? I think it's a matter of political will here. It's wanting to open up that can of worms and entertain these ideas at that federal agency level, because a lot of people look to NASA as the gold standard for space exploration, and I think they've earned that. You just don't want to get involved when it comes down to your when it comes down to your reputation. You got to do what you can to protect it. So just trying to be fair here, once they start going down this rabbit hole of pyramids on Mars. I mean, however, the culture shifting, as you know. We now live in what people are describing as the age of disclosure. We're addressing these UFOs in the sky at a serious top level. We're holding congressional hearings and such. You have people like Avi Loeb taking this very seriously in academia. So if we're talking about UFOs and what the heck these things are and non-human intelligence and how long they've been here on Earth, is it really that much of a stretch to talk about these very same issues as relates to the planet Mars? And I think, like you said, most of the public has this understanding based on rover photographs that it's just this boring, desolate wasteland of a planet. With every single rover photograph you see, it's just, okay, here's some rocks, here's some rugged rocks, here's a sandy sand dune landscape, nothing much to see here. When that's the public perception of the planet, then the public interest in exploring the planet kind of goes down. The interest in going there lately has been for colonization purposes, which I'll take it. I'll take the public support where I can get it. But I think the public really needs to know that there is more about Mars than just simply going there and getting boots on the ground and planting an American flag there. It's really, Mars is a crime scene where we need to go do some further investigation to find out exactly what happened to it, because it helps inform our future here on Earth. If Mars was like Earth a long time ago, well, why is it no longer like that? Why is it no longer a blue planet? We have a blue planet now. We don't want it to end up like Mars. So we need to go there and figure out exactly what happened. We have a lot of good data that suggests what happened there, but it would be worthwhile to further study this by actually getting boots on the ground and not just going there to, make a Mars base so Elon Musk can feel better about himself.
I think that the colonization thing that you're talking about, to me that seems like, because I know that there were people like Robert Zubrin, who had spent years and years and years trying to get something off the ground, with a manned mission to Mars, and there's been even through the Bush administration, and they were talking about going to the moon, and then we'll go to Mars, and then. And over that time, we've really shown that I think people have lost a lot of confidence in that aspect of it. And as far as manned missions, or whether it's to do with colonization or far-fetched sort of way futuristic ideas like terraforming and things like that. But what we do have are robotic probes and rovers and orbiters and things like that. So we've got eyes all over Mars at all times. And I think contrary to the, their, it just really kind of seems like really looking down your nose really at the people to not, want to really to think that like what your specific interest is, like say, how they put like on probes and on rovers and things, they have certain experiments and stuff that are like, there's a group of people have this experiment on there. They're, they have time that they've sort of invested to or reserved to do that, this experiment or that experiment. And it's like a lot of those things are very uninteresting to the public. Just like you were saying that the landscape, and if you're just like going to this boring rocky landscape, that's uninteresting to the public. But it seems like it would be obvious that, let's entertain the public a little bit, even if we don't believe that this is a pyramid, or we don't believe that this is some sort of, this anomaly is anything more than just some geologic feature. Let's entertain the public. You could have a huge, publicity campaign, basically like we're going to this pyramid, countdown to going to the pyramid type of thing.
Yes, and it sort of seems counterintuitive. While NASA is not addressing these things directly, that leaves an opportunity for people like us to do that, for people like us to shine a spotlight on these sorts of things, to help educate and inform the public. NASA, I think, sees this as easier for them because then they don't have to burden themselves with that responsibility, and anything that goes sideways, well, they can have their hands clean of that and say, well, if it turns out to be nothing, they can just point to the random guy on the internet and see, well, it came from him. It didn't come from us. But that being said, we now have an obligation. I shouldn't say that. We now have an opportunity, those of us not part of the institutional controlled narrative, not part of academia, to not just educate the public, but galvanize their support. And you know how political influence works. If there's just enough portion of the population that really wants this one thing, well then, congressional people, senators, they might start singing a different tune. If there's so many people saying, oh, this is the next, like just for a random example, like Bitcoin is getting a lot of attention these days. Okay. It started off as this niche thing. Now it's becoming a little bit more mainstream. So who knows what legislation is going to look like surrounding Bitcoin or AI, let's just say. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because of its popularity with the public, you have an opportunity to affect how funding is secured for projects. And I agree with you. I do think that talking about these strange things on Mars would help elevate the funding, because if the public hears, oh, there's pyramids on Mars, we got to go look at that, let's do that, more funding for NASA, it seems like a win-win to me. So I agree.
Yeah, it seems like a tremendous opportunity for a publicity stunt, if nothing else, just to say, here's our target, and here's some photos that we've seen from the orbiter. Here's what it looks like. Here's what people have been saying, and we're going to do this for you guys because we want to go straight to it, and we're going to show you what it's like, and we're going to land and maybe land the rover. The rovers go quite a distance. You could land the rover 20 miles from it or 10 miles from it, and then slowly work your way there, and along the way you could, study whatever you wanted to study and take core samples or along the way. And then, that would be your sort of end goal, would be to, okay, now we're here at the thing that they call the pyramid. And if it wasn't a pyramid, then it's a win for NASA. They could say, look, see, it's not a pyramid, and this is what it is, and this is how we believe that it was formed. And then we have, like, if it's not a pyramid, then it's at least geologically interesting,
Right. Like, oh, now we know nature can make something that looks like it has 4 equal flat sides, and then it becomes a matter of explaining that. I did ask Robert Zubrin about this over a direct message exchange. I said, hey, don't you think you guys start talking about these anomalies on Mars that might help increase exposure and increase funding. I just think I didn't get a response with that one specifically. I think he's just, I like him, I like his work, but he's unfortunately captured within the NASA ecosystem that if you can't deviate from that official narrative if you want to have anything to do with NASA funding. So
yeah. Well, speaking of things that nature can do, one of your more recent videos was about this electric universe theory and about the Valles how do you pronounce it?
Marineris. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I felt like I was ordering the Valles Marineris at an Italian restaurant there.
Yeah.
But it's and the idea that that there's this electrical charge between like maybe two bodies. Like, can you tell us a little bit about that? Because that seemed like a fascinating thing.
Yes, the electric universe theory, the electric universe, or rather, there's what we call the standard model of cosmology, which explains things in ways we've heard of all of our lives, using Einstein's equations. We now can explain what gravity is, how stars work, what black holes are. But unfortunately, these are just, so theories are well developed and based off of evidence. But at the end of the day, gravity is a theory. We don't exactly know what it is. We just have ways of trying to explain its effects. And if you take a look at, let's just say, an entire galaxy, we may have heard of this term dark matter. And what the heck is dark matter? Dark matter is just a term used to describe something we don't understand. Why does a galaxy hold its shape? A galaxy might have a few 100 billion stars in it, but when they run the calculations, the numbers demonstrate that there's simply not enough gravity in the galaxy to hold it together. So scientists say, well, there must be some other force that is holding it together. We're going to call that dark matter. Okay? So they don't know what is holding a galaxy together. So there's just not enough gravity based off of the observational evidence that we see of all just the stars in the galaxy. So they call that dark matter. The electric universe, or rather plasma cosmology, suggests gravity isn't what we think it is, and that galaxies are held together by electromagnetism and not this other force that we call gravity. So this is really just the introductory level of this. I'm not an expert on this. I became aware of it making the film, and since then there are other people more qualified to discuss these things. But the plasma cosmology model of the universe has been around just as long as the standard model of the universe and has been published on by qualified, credentialed experts, Nobel laureates, et cetera, et cetera. It's just not that well known to the public. People only know of one model of the universe. They're simply not aware of this other model. So that's all the context that people need to understand, that there are different forces at work that, or rather, a different explanation of forces we already understand, electromagnetism, that are, when applied, demonstrate how the universe is actually working, how it's governed. But to your question about the Valles Marineris scar, it's this giant canyon on Mars. It's the size of the United States. And you look at it and you're like, how the heck was this thing? How do you have a giant canyon the size of the United States formed on Mars? And conventional explanations are, well, that's just river erosion, water erosion, or it was volcanism or plate tectonics. These are things that geologists understand. Those are the terms that they know how to use. But when you're looking at it, surface level, untrained eye, none of those really make any sense. They're all just put forth because those are forces of nature we already understand here on Earth. What we're seeing on Mars with this Valles Marineris scar is not the product of any one of those forces. It is an electrical discharge scar. Now, what the heck does that mean? Well, believe it or not, sometimes, well, what is electrical discharge? Think about this. Lightning bolt. That's all that it is. Okay. Lightning itself is plasma discharging between the clouds and the ground. And sometimes when lightning hits the ground, it actually does create a crater. It actually can disrupt the crust of the Earth. So if you have a much larger lightning bolt, not something that we see here on Earth, but something that is on an entirely different scale, an order of magnitude higher, larger than a lightning bolt, let's say not coming from the clouds to the ground, but from one planet to another, and there's discharge between the two of them, what type of disruption might that cause when that discharge strikes the planet's surface? Now, how it sounds crazy, I know, but if you think about it, we have lightning bolts, and then when we touch the door handle, that's a little electrical shock that we get. That's just a little tiny lightning bolt. So this electromagnetic discharge is scalable. It can happen even on the microscopic level. It can happen on the microscopic level, door handle, lightning, and even larger planetary scale. So if you have two planetary bodies that are passing by one another in, let's say, an unstable version of our solar system much earlier on, one of them is of a positive charge and one of them is of a negative charge, or different charges. If you get them close enough together, they might discharge between the two of them. And why we suspect that this is an electrical discharge canyon is because it has a very peculiar shape to it. And this peculiar shape, scientists have actually demonstrated that they can reproduce it in the laboratory using plasma discharge experiments, electrical discharge experiments. So, and what came to my attention recently was that this peculiar shape that we see on Mars that we can reproduce in the laboratory is also found on Earth. And the relative proportions of this particular scar are the same as they are on Mars. Now, on Mars, we have a canyon, but on Earth, we have uplift. Now, why don't we have a canyon on Mars? And essentially where this is located on Earth is the entire west coast of North America. We see a lot of uplift, mountain ranges, higher elevation. Earth's gravity is a lot greater. So it's, if you have that sort of electrical discharge affecting Earth, it might not pull it out entirely, but it's going to pull it up. It's going to pull the crust of the Earth up. On Mars, it pulled it up and out. And then if you start to think about, William, those rover photographs that you see, what do you see scattered across the landscape? Kind of everywhere.
And just rubble. Just like tiny, it appears to be like just rocks blown all over the place.
So should it come as any surprise to us that what we see as this canyon, this excavation, this giant excavation, a continent-sized excavation, where did all that material go? And if you look at all the rover photographs, it's literally scattered all over the planet, which helps explain exactly why there's so much debris all over the place. It was an instantaneous excavation that was showered all over the planet. And then what else do you see all over the planet are crater impacts. So it flew up into the sky and came raining back down on the planet. So the surface of Mars has been devastated. And a lot of it has to do with this concept of electrical discharge.
Is the mainstream sort of geological explanation for it to something? I mean, for the Valles Marineris, is that for just something to do with water erosion? Because that seems like a massive, like, because the Grand Canyon we have, obviously, that has a river and that's, to do with water erosion. But this is like, on a scale that just dwarfs the Grand Canyon, So is that what
So
they're
so
saying? And
so two things. Yes, I mean they'll say it was due to flooding. Okay, but river water erosion does not produce jagged edges. Okay, water erosion will I mean, think about a pebble, a river pebble. It gets eroded over time. It ends up being very smooth. Water erosion over time smooths things, and what we see is jagged edges. So water erosion, flooding really doesn't make any sense. Now, I'm glad you brought up the Grand Canyon because we do have this river running through it. But even to this day, mainstream science still doesn't understand how it was created, because if a river did it, at one point in time, it would have required this river to flow uphill. Now, if you look at the Grand Canyon from space, it gives you an entirely different perspective on what it actually is. Remember how I was talking about lightning striking the earth? It can sometimes produce craters, okay? Well, when it's not producing craters, other times it will produce a pattern on the ground known as a Lichtenberg pattern, named after the guy who discovered these patterns. Like even sometimes when people get struck by lightning, they have this permanent scar on them that just looks like a giant lightning bolt just across the skin of their body. Okay, and it looks like a lightning bolt. They call it a Lichtenberg pattern, Lichtenberg figure, and there are photographs you can just search online where golf greens, because it's got the pin, that attracts the lightning, right at the hole coming out from the hole is you'll have this Lichtenberg figure, this lightning bolt pattern spread across the entire green. Okay.
mm-hmm.
And when you look at the Grand Canyon from space, it looks like a Lichtenberg figure. It looks like a giant lightning bolt, suggesting that the Grand Canyon was created in much the same way. It was an instantaneous excavation based off of electrical discharge. And then later on, a river started flowing through it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know that you've talked to Robert Schoch a lot, and his expertise is in water erosion and geological features that are caused by water erosion, and made most famous, I guess, by his work with on the Sphinx, and the possible dating of the Sphinx as being much older than people than mainstream science at least says that it is. What has he said about the Valles Marineris?
Robert Schoch was the one who got me into all this. So there's this feature-length documentary produced by this YouTube channel known as the Thunderbolts Project. They have a feature-length documentary specifically about Mars and all the evidence for electrical scarring that is across the entire planet. And Robert Schoch was the one who pointed me in the direction of this documentary, because he is a firm believer in these electromagnetic forces governing our universe. And he has a slightly different take on it. He doesn't think it was a planet to planet thing. He thinks it was related to our sun having an outburst. I mean, if you think of it this way, we see the northern lights in the sky, which is an interaction between the solar wind and the Earth's magnetic field. Now, just think about northern lights on steroids. A much stronger interaction from the sun and a planet could have produced giant electrical discharges, or plasma discharges, what he calls them. I'm using the two interchangeably. So yes, you're right. He has enough knowledge to understand what water erosion looks like, and still says, you know what? These features are not the product of water erosion. This is electrical discharge.
Yeah, well, I think it's fascinating to ask. I mean, it doesn't hurt to ask all these questions, and for something like that, like that would be really, it could teach us a lot about not only Mars, but it could teach us a lot about Earth, like you're talking about with, the Grand Canyon or something like that. If we were to, spend a little bit of time studying that, we could maybe find out how a lot of things happened on here. And yeah, I thank you for coming and talking to me today. And if anybody wants to, I'll leave a link in the description to your channel. which is full of amazing. And really, you can just go down a Mars rabbit hole for a long time with the amount of artifacts and the amount of geological anomalies and possible structures, and even some about the about channeling. I know I had Alison Brown on recently, and she was talking to you about channeling. And I know people have remote viewed Mars, the past of Mars, and talked about civilizations being there before. But your channel is really a great place for people that if you want to just see like a little bit of everything that has to do with the mysteries of Mars, that's a great place to go and do it. But I appreciate you being here with me today.
Thanks, William. And I guess just to close out here, for those people interested in looking at things, I would recommend them checking out the documentary first, which is on Amazon or cable video on demand, because that's really the entry point, the starting point
Blue
for all
Planet
this.
Red.
Yeah, so go to blueplanetred.net. You can find links to watch it there. And then the continuing series is then on YouTube. I learned a bunch of stuff afterwards and just had to keep covering it.
Yeah, I liked how because I love the documentary. I was really impressed with how it was put together and with the people that you had on it that were just like these weren't just it wasn't a bunch of like crackpots. There's people that are experts in their field, and they and then I was also impressed that you've continued that. So really like your YouTube channel is like supplemental material to the documentary, which is so you get that for free.
Yep. Lots of stuff there. The documentary is a much more cinematic experience. I wanted it to feel like an entertainment piece as well. So, there's some really cool music in there, great cinematic shots, some drone photography, and some slow motion, all that kind of stuff. I just wanted it to be like a roller coaster ride, because instead of just talking heads. So I'd say that's the place to start. And yeah, go ahead and follow up on YouTube. So,
all right. Well, thank you for being here.
Hey, thanks a lot, William. Enjoyed it.